Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Inside Whitehall has returned, the long-awaited return. And I'm delighted, me, Jonathan Gullis, that is, to be joined by my co-host, co-star. His name is Mr. James Starkie. Hello, James.
I'm good, mate. Welcome back. I think we should start by saying so we're planning to restart the podcast, and I'm sure as a sign of what will be great future success, we're planning to basically do most of the technical bits ourselves. And so if we
What could
do,
go wrong?
what could go wrong? If we manage to upload this, we're not exactly sure what the next few weeks look like, but we will get there in the end. So
We'll
I'm just
get there.
gonna kind of
And
work
lots
things
to
out.
change. I think the last pod I was on with you, the last time we did an Inside Whitehall podcast together was during the actual general election campaign
Yeah,
before I was sacked by the electorate of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk in July 2024.
it was good to know they've got some sense.
Democracy works. It's been an interesting time. Delighted that we're back here on the pod. And all I can say is, having been resigned to the wilderness of British politics, what a time it has been. What a tumultuous time it has been. I think that any pod would be mad not to start as we are at the beginning of 2026 to kind of roughly come up with some predictions, but also to discuss where are the pitfalls going forward? What are the hopes and ambitions for our main political parties? And what does that mean for the electorate? What does that mean for the many people that run lots of small, medium-sized businesses across the country as well? Breaking what he thought was going to be a calm period of British
The
politics after
grown-ups are
Labour.
in.
The grown-ups are in.
Can you
I
hear that, Jonathan? That's the calm and peace and quiet. No leadership challenges, no backbench chaos. It's all calm. Everything's fine. Don't you
fine.
know that?
It's like we need that famous. If you could show the GIF right now, the famous GIF where he's I think it was Saddam Hussein's spokesperson pretending that everything was fine whilst the Americans were rolling in the tanks
Comma
behind him.
Kalali. He may well be the next comms director in Downing Street. They get through them pretty quickly, so
Please.
anything is possible.
I'd let you grill me first and to
Yeah.
grill me because I've had my own personal political news, and I think
Well,
this is your chance to hold my feet to the fire.
I don't know if you noticed. I've got my turmeric and honey, which I'm sure you think is a woke drink. The honey is also foreign. It's from Germany, Jonathan. Just to really wind you up, but it's in. I don't know if we end up going to be putting it on video, but I'm showing it to the camera. It's in my conservative mug. Now I still have a conservative mug, but you don't. I assume you now have a mug with Nigel Farage's face on it.
No, I have a reform Christmas card though, because yes, James, you're right. In December 2025, I defected, left the Conservative Party that I've been a member of for 18 years, my entire adult life. I'm now a member of Reform UK.
Well,
Those
let me
who
ask you
maybe
this.
missed it.
So I think I know you pretty well. We've known each other a long time. And in all seriousness, I know we had people defected. Lee Anderson had defected. And then we had obviously that period when Nigel Farage came back into politics. You could have defected. You've been a member of the Conservative Party for, I don't know, best part of 15, 18 years, or, all pretty much all your adult life. I know you didn't take the decision to defect lightly. I know if you'd have done it before, you probably would have kept your seat. You probably would have still been an MP. I think if you look at the maths of your old seat, it's quite likely if you'd have gone, it would have been better for you personally, is what I'm saying, if you'd have moved. You didn't. You waited a long time. Why did you decide to go, now?
Yeah, look, it's a fair question. So first of all, before the general election, I was just firmly of the belief that I was elected as a Conservative Member of Parliament, and therefore the electorate had the right to sack me as a Conservative Member of Parliament. It was quite obvious for well over a year the direction of travel in my seat in terms of Labour likely to gain it, split in the centre right wing vote between Reform and the Conservatives. But as I say, that was a matter of principle, and ultimately there was a lot of Conservative councillors, a lot of support me in my work, as well as a Conservative government who had given pots of funding and support to various bits of legislation that I still hold dear and will always celebrate. So ultimately, it was the right thing to do. And then I was very disillusioned after that general election. I think about 10 a.m. I got a call from Rishi Sunak,
Yeah, we were
where
having breakfast.
we were having breakfast, and he very sweetly called me to just basically say sorry, which I thought was very kind of him. Very noble thing to do straight after a heavy defeat. I'm sure was a very sore point for him, and
Mm.
I like to think he and I had very cordial conversation. But yeah, look, I was very disillusioned. I was very anxious about the future of the Conservative Party. As you know, I was involved in one of the leadership campaigns, Priti Patel's leadership campaign to lead the Conservative Party. And after she was unfortunate in not going forward, I then backed Robert Jenrick. And my problem was I was watching closely to see what was going on with the Conservative Party. Had they learnt the lessons that the electorate were trying to tell them? And whether it be certain members of parliament, particularly those who sit on the back benches, not those necessarily on the front bench. I would actually exclude Kemi from that sort of discourse. Predominantly those sat on the back benches, and then a lot of activists. For example, in Warwickshire, there were Conservative councillors celebrating backing the Greens in reaffirming climate emergency, climate change action that was needed, and there are other activists who are still saying, "Oh, leaving the ECHR is not something that we should necessarily do." And I just felt that I was going to be forever trapped. Basically, just felt quite wary about the fact that I just wanted to be around people that predominantly were aligned to the same kind of politics and the same kind of desire of outcomes. And I certainly feel that is the case in Reform UK. Look, my view on the Conservative Party is that there's a lot of rhetoric since Kemi's most recent conference speech and policy announcements that all sound nice in theory, but the Conservative Party promised to keep net migration to the tens of thousands and nearly got to 1 million in 2023. The Conservative Party were the ones who introduced net zero and now claim that they want to dismantle it. The Conservative Party were the ones who said they wanted to reduce the tax burden, yet the tax burden went to the highest it had been on record. And I just felt that litany of broken promises meant I couldn't
But
look a
just let
voter
me
in the
stop
face.
you. I mean, I know you. I know we both know the reality is being an MP versus being a minister or even a prime minister. But you say these things. I'm going to challenge you.
Yeah,
You were in government for these things. You were in government as the kind of commitment to net zero increased. You were in government as migration increased. People criticise my former boss, but one of the people you supported the most was Boris Johnson, and he's really the person at which senior people in reform have said they call it the Boris wave. That's the person you support. So, you know, some people in the Conservative Party will kind of look at some of the Tories defecting to reform and say, "Hang on, mate, this is a bit rich." I saw like Marco Longhi kind of tweet, and it was, and the way he tweeted that you wouldn't know he was involved in it. I mean that's surely a fair criticism.
yeah, absolutely, it's a fair criticism. I don't disown my past. There are certainly things I voted for, which I look back and deeply regret. For example, when Boris Johnson wanted to introduce that new tax for social care, I didn't agree with it. One, it was a new tax. That should never be something the Conservative Party do. It was increasing tax on working people. And three, the solution, which is just basically to throw more money at a broken social care system, wasn't a serious long-term solution. I pinched my nose out of party loyalty and voted for it, and deeply regret to this day that I didn't have the guts to back and rebel the rebellion of I think 100 then sitting Conservative members of Parliament. But I would also say that I think, and you'll know this, James, I was one of the most outspoken backbenchers when it came to particularly issues around immigration. I certainly spoke out against net zero because the damage it was doing just as the ceramic sector within Stoke-on-Trent. I think, therefore, that I did show. There was a running joke. Let's be perfectly frank, that I was basically the already sitting Reform MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, whilst there with some of the views that I had and still have to this day. And ultimately, as I say, the problem is I basically got to the stage where I felt like the Conservative Party had left me. I hadn't left the Conservative Party. I've gone to Reform UK because I ultimately believe that I trust them more. I trust them more that on what is, I think, a need for a serious radical reform of our system, that they're the ones who are going to see that through. And I feel that the Conservative Party is only saying the things they're saying now because of reform's existence. And if reform didn't exist, the Conservative Party would ditch many of these policies.
Tell me if this is. I'm going to play back to you. So you kind of trust reform more to deliver these things,
Yeah.
because at the moment, I don't think it's unfair to say that on a lot of key policies that you would be looking at, there's not massive difference between the current Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage's reform. Kemi probably wasn't very pro net zero when she was in government, right? I don't think that's unfair. I think you would probably agree with that.
Yes, I would.
She's being authentic on that. They've taken a strong position on migration. You know, you were part of that government. And obviously, she's taken that big position on the ECHR. I look at Kemi and think, I'm not sure she needed a huge amount of convincing to leave the ECHR. Some people in the party might, as you say. I'm not sure that one of those people would be Kemi Badenoch. So I guess, is it? I don't want to put words into your mouth. Are you basically saying? It sounds like you're saying to me, yeah, I kind of believe Kemi Badenoch believes what she says. Right? Whether or not she can do it, I don't know. But I believe she believes what she says. I don't really believe a lot of tall people in the Conservative Party believe what she's saying. And I think I believe Nigel Farage means what he says. And I think more people around him agree with it and they're not going to change their mind. Is that basically
Yeah, I
what
don't.
you're saying?
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. Look, I think if you were trying to put Kemi on a sliding scale of where I thought she sat within the Conservative Party, I think she's certainly more on the right of the Conservative Party, naturally where I saw myself as sitting as well. But as I say, there are literally sitting Conservative members of Parliament who voted against my own 10-minute rule bill alongside Sir Keir Starmer, alongside Shabana Mahmood, alongside Yvette Cooper, to ignore and derogate from the ECHR in order for us to get flights of illegal migrants off to Rwanda. The
Are you,
fact
hang
that
on, I'm going to stop you there. On the 10-minute rule bill, that would have been highly unlikely to have been passed unless you had government backing. You didn't have government backing. There's a lot of MPs that wouldn't have backed
well,
it unless they had government
and that
backing.
in itself is another example of
But as a new
where I
leader, you're talking
but
about
it
Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party. That we
but
just
you're
agreed
still
that.
talking but I'm still talking about the fact that I need to look and trust the Conservative Party, which I don't, because there are people sat there who fundamentally argued against things like that. They were relentlessly campaigning against that. Now I'm suddenly meant to believe that when push comes to shove, they'll vote for it. I'm sorry. There are many of those people who only in the end swallowed the Brexit vote because it knew that it meant they would keep their jobs and keep their seats. There's way too much careerism and not enough actual people coming into politics via the Conservative who I think want to bring about serious radical change to the
I think so. I think there's a lot more people in reform on my wavelength, and if they get into government, they're not going to change their mind. And I
so
think
look.
there's some people in the party that are some of the stuff me and you would agree on, and sounds like you would disagree with Cami on a lot of her platform, but you just think either she won't stay in charge and someone else who you disagree with might get back in charge, or if she does get into government, there'll be too many people around her stopping her doing the big radical things that she wants to do and you think she needs to do.
The time I've spent, number one, I have huge admiration for Nigel Farage. I think he's been consistent in a lot of ways and have been seriously influential within British politics for a number of decades. And it hadn't been for people like Nigel Farage, I don't think David Cameron puts the Brexit referendum in the
Yeah, of
2015
course.
manifesto. So that's one of the reasons I have huge admiration for him and his consistency and his conviction in his beliefs. I then also can say from my own experience of now having spent time with reform members, both in my local branch, but also having met them across the country in various different ways, I just feel there's a consistency in the alignment on the views in terms of what we want to do, what we want to achieve. And I feel that, if there were any disagreements, they're tiny minor tweaks rather than the Conservative Party. It had become such a broad church with no central defining religion. And that's why I think the Conservative Party, sadly, is going to face near extinction come the next general election.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure if we keep doing this over the next year and beyond up to the next election, I dare say that we're going to have more debates about the difference or the similarities between Reform and the Conservatives. I'm willing to take a bet on that.
I think conversation that will never end. And look, I think it's a fascinating time. I will say this, by the way, and I do mean it. I think Reform UK has this once in a lifetime, once in a century opportunity come the next general election. And if they were unsuccessful in becoming the majority, winning government, I would fear that our politics would return back to just the same old Labour and Conservatives fighting over what they deemed the centre ground, which I think is deeply outdated version of the
Who
centre
knows?
ground.
I think
So
it's hard. Yeah, hard to tell. I mean, on that, so I think we'll return to kind of maybe differences, similarities between you and I and Tories and Reform. In the spirit of kind of looking ahead, why
yeah,
don't we start with Reform? We've kind
yeah,
of,
yeah.
I think you've outlined articulately and, with your personal views in a good way why you've joined Reform. You're not alone. Reform, since we last spoke, they have now, remember when we were kind of debating when Reform might take over the Tory party in the polls? Reform have now been way ahead in the polls for a very long time. I sat in a meeting today and one of the comments was, oh, Reform started to drop down in support. And I just said, well, just to flag something on current polling, Labour have less than 100 MPs, the Tories have about 70. And so maybe Reform might not get a majority, but they've got above 300. So in terms of like how well people are doing, I don't know where we'll end up in the next election. The rise has been meteoric, really, when you look back over just 18 months. And the collapse of Labour has been equally, I don't, meteoric is was too positive a word, perhaps. So, but I think it's also true to say, I mean, we've spoken about this before. I think 2026 could be a really interesting year, and it'll kind of answer a few questions that the last year, 2025, threw up, and will kind of set the scene for the next election. I guess so. I've written about this. We'll publish this via the Substack, the Inside Whitehall Substack that I started a few weeks ago. I think this year's a big year because it's Reform are riding high. They've got money coming in. To me, this is a big, and they're going to do well in the May local and devolved elections. Don't know exactly what it's like, but even though people know it's coming, they're going to be very surprised. And I've seen all this form of Brexit where they kind of talk themselves into thinking it won't happen because they don't want it to happen. The chattering classes, but they need to leverage that and start bringing in talented people, whether that's to have a front bench for the next election, to say this is who my chancellor, etc., might be, the kind of team behind it, the thinkers and so on, and donors and business support and all this kind of stuff that I think you would need if you're going to win. I say you now as Reform, if you're going to win the next election, not do really well, you will definitely do really well. To me, that's beyond doubt. If you're going to win, if Nigel Farage is going to be prime minister without the need of any other party, I mean, how do you see 26? You're just giving it some thoughts.
Yeah, no. So look, I think first and foremost, the Nigel Farage has been accurate in the sense of it's all about continuing the electoral momentum. Those local elections and the devolved elections are a huge point because Nigel Farage, I think, achieved well and above what even Reform were expecting in 2025. 30% national vote share. I think that was 10% higher than Labour, 15% higher than the Conservatives, taking control of 10 local authorities. I don't think any of us expected to see that many local authorities go to outright control of Reform. Where I live up in Staffordshire, for example, Reform ended up with over 50 of the 60 odd councillors. It was just an absolute turquoise tidal wave that smashed in. So, I think that Nigel has to show the continuation of that electoral success. So, at the bare minimum, the national vote share still needs to be 30%. Ideally, it's now at 31, 32. So you can show that it's ticking up. In Wales, the polls suggest it's going to be a fight out between Plaid and Reform for who will be the largest party. Reform will want to have the most members of the Welsh Senate elected and the highest amount of total votes, even if reality is that under proportional representation, they just won't be able to get an outright majority, and therefore Plaid and Labour perhaps do some sort of coalition or supply and confidence deal as has happened, but in the reverse. In Scotland, I still can't get over the fact that we are watching potentially Reform duke it out with Labour to see who will be the official opposition to the SNP. I think if Reform comes second in Scotland, that is humongous. And that shows that Reform can win well out of the industrial heartlands in places like Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. It can, therefore, Wales, we know, is pro-Brexit and was always quite positive for UKIP when it came particularly to European elections. But Scotland, no one ever thought Nigel could really break through there. So that would be a huge moment. And then I think in England, again, there's a lot of Labour councils more than Conservative this time up. How do Reform do in urban Greater Manchester, in urban Birmingham, for example? Do we see Labour hemorrhaging to the sort of the Greens and maybe losing in some areas as well to Reform too? I think that electoral momentum is huge. Then comes the challenge on slowly but surely showing more policy, particularly on issues like the economy and business, where I think the Conservatives in recent times, I know we'll come to it, have started to get more of the ear of the electorate, as that has obviously been something that the media have certainly focused on in recent times much more, and the voters are obviously rightly concerned about with the cost of living. And I think, therefore, there comes the pressure of Reform now have to produce new faces. I think Zia Youssef's done an incredible job on the media round, as well as doing the policy. Richard Tice has done a load of carrying, as well as obviously Nigel himself. But it is, I think there was talk that there was a lot of studying of the Five-Star movement in Italy, where they slowly but surely were announcing, here will be our chancellor. This is the seat they will run in. If they're elected, this will be, and they're therefore now our economic spokesperson and setting the agenda for Reform UK when it comes to economic policy. You've seen it with Danny Kruger. His job is now to prepare reform for government. You've seen Lord Offord, who defected from the Conservatives in Scotland to reform, potentially about to become the leader of reform in Scotland. Layla Cunningham, already now announced as the London mayoral candidate for Reform UK, and Nigel himself saying she will be the face of reform in London. So I think it's now about bringing in what's this outside talent, how credible are they, and how much will they be able to influence the policy that can win over those few voters, that extra 5-6% that Nigel knows he needs if he is going to get an outright majority come the next general election.
So, do you think some of the things you outlined there are they kind of markers of success for reform this year? So, by May we're going to have all of we'll know the locals, how well they did in the locals. Obviously, I don't know the latest. I mean, Labour are busy cancelling elections as quickly as they can pop up, but we've got we've definitely got. I don't think they can cancel Scotland and Wales.
Definitely happening.
They're going to be markers of success. And you've said, I mean, what in terms of kind of bringing people forward, as you said, to be shadow chancellor or whatever it might be, or having I mean, you could take. I mean, I'm sure they're loath to take lessons from the Tories, but David Cameron did have these kind of like committees and all this kind of. I can't remember what they called them now, but I remember looking at them for something I wrote last year ahead of the election to kind of look at certain bills and policy areas. So you could do an economics committee with heavyweights from the city or whatever on it. Do you think you need to do those this year?
I don't think you need to dump every single policy out there, and I don't think you need to have an entire shadow cabinet ready to go either. But first and foremost, I would probably target having an economic spokesperson, a shadow chancellor. I think that is probably, by the end of 2026, one of the most important people to have in, as I say, as a new face, and also able to spend time setting the direction of travel for what reforms economic policies will be. Nigel has now made it clear that Reform UK will look at cutting the size of the state and cutting the spending of the state before it even introduces any tax cuts, which was seen as a big change, obviously, from the 2024 manifesto. And therefore, let's be quite, again, not too dissimilar to the golden rule that's been introduced by Kemi Badenoch and Mel Stride of the Conservative Party. Danny Kruger said in a recent interview with Tim Shipman in The Spectator, which I think you and I both read, James, today, that reform's going to have to put probably more detail than most have ever put forward in a manifesto, maybe even drafting certain bills so they are abundantly clear to the House of Lords, to the civil service. This is our agenda. It's been voted on. It's been approved, and therefore you should not be getting in the way of doing it. And any future or prospective reform member of Parliament is therefore already signed up to this very detailed policy, and they should not be getting in the way. They should be just helping the government, if it was a reform government, ramming this agenda through.
Well, I think the country's in need of radical change. I read the Danny piece, as you know, I've got a lot of time for Danny, and a lot of what he said makes sense. I think any government that's going to be successful in my and I think your eyes is going to have radical plans. And if you look at Labour, and I don't say this to make a party political point, I think Labour had all the time in the world. Everyone knew they were going to win for certainly a year, if not two. And they had a lot of resources. They could have gone to kind of wealthy, backers, former leaders. And the problem is they didn't have a huge amount of policy when they came in. And that's when you've got all your momentum and support. And I think it definitely applies to reform. The civil service will set out to stop reform. They know that. I know that. You know that. The best chance they've got is having everything as much as they can ready. I think Labour would be in a far better position if they were much clearer about what they wanted to do on regulation and housing. And we were now virtually 90% of the way through that. I think any government coming in next time to show the public they mean business won't allow MPs off for summer and minimal time over for Christmas. And certainly while they're getting their main stuff done, won't even have weekends. I think that, those kinds of things need to be a sign. And they need to say to MPs, people like you, if you run for them and get elected, if you block any of the stuff we're doing, we said at the election, you're not going to be an MP anymore. But you're certainly not going to be one for us.
I think it has to be that brutal. I think it has to be that serious, as you say. The fact that the House of Commons, when Labour came in on a big change agenda, was still running essentially Monday to Wednesday on normal hours when, like you say, it should have been particularly on infrastructure and housing legislation, just sit for the entire week and get that all the stages of that bill done on the floor of the House,
I mean,
both through the
Labour
House of
came in
Commons and
and
House of Lords.
went straight into summer.
Yeah, exactly. I
And you
was
say, oh, there's
baffled.
the 20 billion back hole and it's all terrible. And the public go, okay, well, why are you on holiday then?
I know, I agree with you, and I think this will be a huge challenge for reform. For example, it was Kevin Byrne. He was the founder of Checker Trade. He's now sort of the figurehead for reform for small business. I think that was a really interesting person with real world experience of developing a business from the ground up, becoming a very successful multimillionaire, now obviously helping small businesses. That's the kind of person I think that will get the interest, particularly of the business community, the fire, Canary Wharf types, the bond markets, the traders who have a lot of sway in terms of how things can and go for governments, as we've seen with Liz Truss and as we've seen even for Rachel Reeves when she was crying on the front bench in the House of Commons. So I think those type of names, alongside the types of Danny Kruger, who I think brings a lot of deep thought, deep thinking, and government experience, both as a special advisor, but also as now an experienced parliamentarian, I think is going to be very important. So I think number one priority reform is that continued electoral success, and May is a huge marker. And Nigel Farage himself has said on Times Radio that he knows that that is a big moment about whether or not the conversation will be, it is clear reform could be on the cusp of government. And that conversation will set, I think, that election will very much set potentially a future general election conversation. And then on top of that, right, who are the people who are going to serve in this reform government? Bearing in mind, it's been made clear by Zia Youssef that about half, at least of the cabinet, maybe even the government roles, are going to be experts from outside with real world experience. So, lots of MPs coming in who won't be getting government jobs. You're going to
You're
have
going to
to,
have,
who are they going to be? What are they going to do? What do they bring to the table?
I think we'll perhaps move on and look at Labour, but I think there's some contradictions. When the realities of government move in, it'll be interesting to see how these plans take shape. Reading the piece in The Spectator, written by Tim Shipman, that is clearly spoken to Danny Kruger. Danny talks about bringing in some really big bills and kind of pushing them through, but then restoring parliamentary democracy. And I think I've got a lot of sympathy for what he says, which is a lot of political power that people expect their politicians to have when they go to the ballot box has been devolved to quangos and regulators. And I think he sees bringing that back to Parliament, which I think is broadly a good thing. If you have most of your MPs, you're not in the executive, that's what they're going to be focused on. And if you allow Parliament a lot of power, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Obviously, we don't know, even if reform were to get into government, what majority they had. So that kind of balance of allowing MPs a lot of power and not having the executive branch have too much power, which, because I think this is not to compare Farage and Trump at all, just in terms of models. Trump has managed to do so much because he has that really strong executive power. There's questions over the use of some of it, but nonetheless, he as president has just signed up. He hasn't had to had a vote on lots, if any, of the things he's done, apart from the finance bill. And so I kind of think that balance is going to be interesting. A big boost of parliamentary democracy.
It's going to be a fascinating time. And like you say, I think that Danny's got a huge job on his hands. And look, I'm friends, obviously, with Danny, set up the New Conservatives with him, rebelled with him on things like winter framework and the last votes on the Rwanda bill because we didn't think it was tough enough,
You
especially
renamed
regarding.
the WhatsApp group
I'm not in the
DP?
group. After I
Okay.
joined Reform UK, I left the group because there are sitting members of Parliament in there. I didn't want to make them feel uneasy about having good, frank conversation with other like-minded people. So I think that Danny's got a big job. And like I say, anyone, I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of the chattering class talking that this just can't happen, it's not feasible, and lo and behold, they'll wake up one day and they'll see that Prime Minister Nigel Farage is on his way to meet the King before then being driven into Downing Street, and they'll have no one else to blame but themselves because they haven't taken seriously what's going on and what the electorate are telling them, which is they're sick and tired of having big promises made and then not being delivered on, and having a system that they just clearly see more and more money being chucked at, and yet the outcomes, whether that be at the NHS, your local council, are just simply not matching the amount of money that seems to be pouring into them. This
Well,
is
let's
where, well, I'll say for
let
Labour, they've got a huge opportunity because
well,
you and I'm sure James would argue for Labour, regardless of where they are currently in the polls.
they do. I mean, let's go to Labour. The grown-ups, as they kind of were briefed. I think we're on about phase 4, 5 now. I don't know. Although, we were told over Christmas there's no more slogans, and then we were told by one of the Prime Minister's main advisors, got nothing, the government's got no problems, it's the electorate that are wrong. So somehow, I think somehow maybe we need to change the electorate. But to be serious for a second, so, you know, astonishingly, within a kind of a year of being elected, we had we spent the build up to the last Labour conference, which was only their second in power after what was it, nearly 15 years out of
170 seat
power,
majority.
172 majority. We went into that conference with an open challenge to the leader of the Labour Party, the Prime Minister. And then we were told after his conference speech that everything was going to be amazing. I think when you spoke about how we weren't quite sure that some of the write-ups they got that week would stand the test of time. They haven't. And so we start the year with the Prime Minister openly saying, oh, if you get rid of me, it'll be terrible. Putin will be happy. Whatever, all these kind of arguments they've got. But the fundamental is he thinks his position is under threat. I don't think that's personally a controversial statement. Everyone in Labour I speak to, that is what they are all talking about.
I still think Keir Starmer will be lead the Labour Party and therefore Prime Minister, because I think the mechanism within the Labour Party, and for those who don't know, James and I have delved into this and spoken to
Yeah.
our people and friends in Labour, to get rid or to challenge the sitting leader of the Labour Party, 80 members of Parliament have to publicly put their names on a letter
And
to
it's not a
say,
confidence vote, it's a challenge, right?
as you have to say, we want to challenge the Prime Minister. And by the way, here's the candidate. Then there would be a vote of that candidate against Sir Keir Starmer. And, bearing in mind this happened,
Those names
those names
become
are public. And we saw this with Jeremy Corbyn. I think it was Angela Eagle who was sort of the stalking horses. But Jeremy Corbyn won, I think, quite a resounding victory, if I remember correctly. So then you go to what else could happen. Are you going to see a bit what happened with Boris Johnson? Are you going to see a large amount of cabinet ministers and ministers say, if you don't go, we're leaving government? You get the boost to your salary by being a government minister. You get your red box. You get your potentially government car. You've got your department. You've got your title. How many people are willing to really throw that all away on the hope that that forces the prime minister out? Bearing in mind that any future leader, if there were a successful challenge, would say, is this person now too risky to bring back into government? Bearing in mind they were resigned before. So even though I think the results for them in May will be ugly in Scotland and in Wales, maybe by cancelling enough elections in parts of England, it will sort of lessen or soften the damage overall. I just think it's going to be very hard for that challenge. I mean, do you disagree? Where do you think? Do you think Keir Starmer's still there yourself?
I think he's an above 50% chance that he stays, kind of broadly where you are. I don't think it's impossible, but the same as you, I think the mechanism's very tricky. I spent past decade in the Tory party, we're both Tories. Neither of us are Labour, we've got quite a bit of Labour mates. When I talk to Labour friends, there's two things that I find conflicting that I can't work out. One is a lot of them, and I include people who are technically in government who said this to me, don't think he'll be there at the end of the year. None of them, when I say how's it going to happen, can explain why. Now that actually leans me to thinking he might go, because as someone we've been around our fair share of leadership elections. You can kind of feel it, and so sometimes you can't explain how someone's going to go, but you just know it's not built on very much, or it might be all powers ebbing away or whatever. I've been there when Theresa May went, and Boris Johnson went, and Liz Truss went a bit quicker than the others, and you just can kind of feel it. And so I don't discount the many Labour people I spoke to at all. Take that very, very seriously. They know a lot
I
more
agree with
than
you on that.
me. They hang around with people. They talk to people. But as an outsider, I can't quite see how it happens. So I think it might happen before the next election. I think if it doesn't happen after May, it almost certainly won't happen this year. Because the one thing I would say is, and tell me if you disagree with this, you need a spark. You
Yeah,
need an event. It rarely happens. I don't think it happened to any of our recent leaders, and I go back to David Cameron with that, where they were just unpopular for a long time, and it kind of got too much. And I think maybe if you looked at IDS when we were in opposition, that kind of built up of just build up of unpopularity was the kind of thing that he just, I don't think he ever fought an election. But I think in terms of our leaders, whilst we've been in government, I think you needed something to crystallise what was going on
Well, to back you up
for
there
the
quickly,
movement to
James,
happen.
let's look at Theresa May. It was basically after those European elections in 2019 that was the straw that broke the camel's back. After well over a year, it was open about people putting in letters, people
She
publicly
won a
declaring they
conference,
put
though, by
letters
the way.
in. If you look at Tony Blair, it was basically just relentless briefing from Gordon Brown's team. And then
I
I
think
think
with
there was,
May, just to say, people listen to say it probably shouting at their headphones. In particular, I think basically they got close to the letters again. And I'm not sure if the rules were at the time, someone might correct us, maybe you had to wait a year or something. But I think Graham Brady, who was
yes,
chair of the 22 at the time, basically went to the PM and said,
I've got,
I've got the letters or I'm very close again. And I can't ignore this. And I can't remember if it's in Graham's book. It might be Graham Brady's got a book out, which I'm afraid I haven't read. But I'm pretty sure the version of the story I heard from someone who I think was in or around those meetings said Graham Brady said, you need to tell me what you're going to do. And if you don't do anything, we're probably going to have another conference vote. I think that's kind of why Theresa May. But again, that's in a real clear event. That is not just you're really unpopular. That is something's happening if you don't do this.
exactly. And I think if let's be frank, Boris Johnson, right? A lot of people talk about Partygate. It wasn't Partygate, it was Chris Pincher was what
Yeah.
broke
So what can
the
do this to Keir Starmer?
you'd have to wonder another budget where potentially you're having to raise taxes again further, albeit that looks very unlikely. But I would say that's another obvious danger point, or indeed Labour Party conference.
Will Wes challenge it?
I think we all know the rule in politics, which is that he or she who wields the knife very rarely
Mm.
ends up being in power. I think Andy Burnham's the one who's been closest to being frank and saying, I want to come back to
But he's
Westminster.
not an MP, so he
And he's
needs to
not
become
even
an
MP.
MP first.
And he needs to become an MP. And therefore, because he's a police crime commissioner, as well as the mayor of Greater Manchester, the Greater Manchester mayoralty would also go up for election. And if you look at the polling around the donor to Greater Manchester, you would suggest Reform could be within a chance of winning that mayoralty. So would Andy Burnham want to potentially win a parliamentary seat to come back to Parliament, but at the same time risk seeing Greater Manchester going turquoise with Reform UK? What damage would that do potentially with parliamentary colleagues when you're trying to convince them that you're the one who can stem the tide of vote losses? So I think that's another interesting aspect as well. I think May's huge. I agree with you. If between May and July before summer recess there is not a move, then I think it's very unlikely, unless something out the blue happens, that Keir Starmer goes before the end of 2026.
So we're saying stick. And the other thing, and we'll get into this when we get closer, I'm sure we'll do some stuff on the locals, is interestingly, they've scheduled the King's speech for, I think, within 2 weeks of the locals.
Yes, it's a confidence
My
vote because you lose the whip if
my read of that is also, are you really going to take out a leader just before the monarch's going into Parliament? And do you want all that kind of chaos? So I think that was a tactical move to do everything they can to shore up the PM's position to make it as difficult as possible to challenge him. Let's see if that works out. We may revisit that. I'm sure now we've said that Keir's safe, everyone in Downing Street is breathing a sigh of relief. They've heard it from us. More could they want?
or we put the nail in his coffin.
Yeah, go and put money immediately on Keir Starmer
Keir
to go
Starmer
in 12
going.
months. No, we wouldn't encourage anyone to gamble. Gamble at your own risk. You remember
Conservative
them?
Party.
They're in a deeper shade of blue. The Conservative Party, Gullis, your old friends. Some of us are still there.
Yep.
I mean, I think midway through last year, there was a bit of uncertainty about Kemi. And I think if I'll make my pitch, I'll give you my view.
Go on.
I think Kemi improved a lot towards the end of last year in PMQs. I think people rightly say the public don't care about PMQs. They don't pay any attention. But MPs do. And MPs are the only people who can get rid of it. And it helps the mood music in Westminster. So we haven't seen that really translate to polling yet. And I think that is when you can start talking about the Tory party turning a corner. I think we've got difficult locals. But I think the Conservative Party conference really played to their strengths, which is the economy, where they still poll okay on versus the other parties, largely ahead. I think one poll showed Reform doing better on the economy recently. But on the whole, Tories have still maintained their lead with the public on who can handle the economy. And so I think that played to Tory strengths. And so I think we start the year with Kemi in the safest position she's probably been in since she was elected leader. I did PMQs on the radio this week, and I thought it was broadly a score draw because it was all about international affairs. That was really difficult to do as leader of the opposition. But I thought Kemi again showed that she can think very quickly on her feet. Starmer had a pop at Lord Wolseley, the Shadow Attorney General, which to me was crazy. And Kemi was very quick-footed and kind of very natural in swinging right back to him. The PM looked almost shocked at how strong Kemi came back at him. And I think that shows she's kind of, I don't know if she's enjoying it more. She looks like she's enjoying it. That's part of the thing. I mean, I think one of the reasons people like Farage is he looks like he enjoys it. Whether he does or not, I don't know. So I think that she's in the best position she's been in for a while. Personally, I think we need to put some numbers on the board in terms of polling to show we're making a move. We've kind of stabilised, but not moved wildly forward. I don't know if you disagree with anything I've just outlined.
No, so I think, first of all, 6 months ago, there was no way we would have said Kemi Badenoch is more likely to remain leader of the Conservative Party than Sir Keir Starmer is of the Labour
Yes.
Party. It's an amazing, I certainly think Sir Keir Starmer's fortunes are much dicier than Kemi Badenoch's
That's
at
a
this
turnaround
present
since
moment in
last
time.
summer.
That is a hell of a turnaround. I think Kemi went into Conservative Party conference, and I think it felt very much like this was a do or die moment. And I think we saw suddenly a raft of policy announcements that we were promised wouldn't happen, but they certainly happened. But they absolutely played to the gallery, which was Conservative MPs and Conservative Party members, those activists who you want to go out, knock on doors to find some real enthusiasm. And I think she gained a lot of confidence from that speech and the feedback she received, particularly from the grassroots. And then you saw that backed up when she then had the budget, which I think, to be honest with you, wasn't exactly a hard one to respond to. One, she's up against the most unpopular Prime Minister and Chancellor since polls have begun in terms of leadership approval ratings. And second of all, Labour decided to bizarrely trail essentially the entire budget. Chancellor
Yeah.
actually got to her feet, which meant that I think Kemi had plenty of ammunition to go on, but still put that speech together and did absolutely do a number on Rachel Reeves and said a lot of things to
But you get
Rachel
a
Reeves. I
penalty.
was about to say, to be perfectly frank, I think since those two events, you've seen her confidence grow, while Sir Keir Starmer's has almost, well, I think is dissipating in PMQs, knowing that he's trying to keep the troops behind. He's busy trying to rally the troops behind him rather than laying punches on the opposition.
Oh yeah, I
When
mean the backbench is the Labour Party now run the government, right? Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. So I think yes, Kemi has seen her personal ratings go up. I'm very skeptical, like you, of how many people do tune into a PMQs or to a budget speech, but still, they obviously have been having at least now some policies to go on the airwaves, and ministers can say, well, we would scrap business rates for pubs, as is currently now being debated, and Labour are about to perform another U turn, it seems,
Yeah,
in this regard.
looks
The
like
family
they will.
farm, well, I think Reform and Conservatives were both very vocal and both fighting for that rural vote when it came, and obviously Labour U turn there meant that that would have won over
And
the
I think
farmers
if you
too.
speak to, I don't know how much you say this is the leader or the team around her, but she appoints or runs the team around her. I think they also feel they got some scouts with kind of Angela Rayner and some other stuff last year where I think they felt like CCHQ was getting a bit more into moving up the gears after a kind of slow start to the year.
I think you and I know him, James. The unsung hero of CCHQ, Sheridan Westlake, is
Yes.
absolutely causing Labour ministers chaos when he starts digging in. And certainly he has, once he's got his claws into a Labour cabinet minister, he's certainly not letting go until he sees them gone. So I think that he's obviously, I think people like that are really going above and beyond in helping obviously take the fight to Labour.
Enjoy going back in now.
But what I will say is we've now seen a number of polls where Labour have actually slipped to third on
Yeah.
average poll ratings. The Conservatives have, for the first time since Rishi Sunak left, I think it was, as leader, it's the first time we've now seen Conservatives ahead of Labour. But yes, you're right. There are some polls suggesting the Conservatives on 22, 23. I still think they're in 19 at 20% mark person. I think it's important to remember they are still below where they were at the 2024 general election, which was one of the worst results. There is still a lot of work to do. And obviously, I think there's a lot of voters sat at home. Those who sat at home were predominantly Conservative voters, and now Conservative and Reform are fighting heavily for those voters to back one of them because they feel, I think it's fair to say that if you've gone from Conservative Reform, it seems at this moment in time, you're very unlikely as a voter to return to the other side
But I would
anytime
also
soon as
say, as a
well.
Conservative, if you didn't go out and vote, if you were a Conservative voter who didn't vote Conservative, but you didn't go to vote Reform in 24, then they are up for grabs.
So I mean,
And
and I think that
I very much
and that's
so.
who Reform and Conservatives are fighting right now for who can get as many of those people over the line because that will be the difference for Reform getting to 35%. That'll be the difference for the Conservatives to get back to where they were at the 2024 general election, and then try and add more numbers on top. I think the Conservative Party go in feeling a bit more boisterous, a bit more happy. But look, if they end up fourth, maybe even fifth in places like Wales and Scotland, that's going to be hard to swallow. There's a lot of short money that comes with that will fund additional staff. There's researchers and policy experts. And obviously just means it's harder for the Conservatives to get on the airwaves in other parts of the country to push their message and their ideas. And let's be honest, the media will fawn over more Reform if they have indeed become the official opposition both in Wales and in Scotland. So it's going to be the battle of trying to get the media's attention in order to get the public's attention.
Yeah, it's going to, I mean, these are all reasons why I think it's going to be an interesting year. And let's kind of just try to wrap it up. If we're looking at the year ahead, I think we have to have a quick look at the Green Party.
Yeah.
Because on the right...
Who would have thought it?
Exactly. Who would have thought it? On the right, we've got this kind of dynamic. Can Reform win an outright majority? With the Tories still doing okay? Will the Tories exist? Who knows? Who knows? We're going to see that play out. And I think Labour were very focused on reform last year. A lot, they put Shabana Mahmood, the tough-talking Home Secretary, who seems to have a huge amount of admirers in the lobby, which I'm sure is absolutely nothing to do with her answering the phone to them and is purely to do with her ability. Labour faced this problem, which is a guy called Zach Polanski, who your leader described yesterday as a lunatic. And I think someone else described to me today and said his economic plans are, quote, madness to non-existent. So I'm sure me and you have got our own views on Zach Polanski's platform, which are probably very similar. But he does, however, I think Farage even acknowledged this, he does, however, have the ability to communicate. And he's starting to eat a lot of Labour's lunch. So interesting. I mean, like, where do you see that? Can he maintain that momentum? There's obviously a market for him, but I don't think he hasn't got a whole load of policies that's, to me, seen they would be popular enough to take you to 15%. But is it enough just to be the alternative? He can consistently get 12 to 15%, But what do you think?
Well, I think when he was elected leader of the Green Party, there was all that chatter around the same time that your party was going to come into existence, led by, at that moment, it was meant to be jointly by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. And Zach Polanski was asked relentlessly and said he'd be willing to work with them, do some deals on elections, but also said, I'd love Jeremy and Zara to join. Then it became clear that Jeremy and Zara were clearly, or their camps were clearly at war with each other.
Given the left normally get on so well with each other.
I know.
Who could have predicted that?
And that there was this going to be long, drawn-out, elongated process to formating this party because they wanted it to be as democratic as possible. So Zach Polanski basically went, I've essentially got 3 to 6 months of total open space with the Corbynista socialist left. And I'm going to absolutely flood the airwaves, flood social media. I'm going to say, you don't need to go to your party. There's already a Corbynista right here, and my name is Zach Polanski. And I've got a machine called the Green Party that has infrastructure, has councillors, has MPs, and therefore...
Did win the last election already.
Did win the last election, 5 MPs themselves.
I think even before Polanski, wasn't the last election must have been their best performance in an election.
Yes, it would have been. So, and winning in certain seats like, was it Northwest Herefordshire, safe Tory seat for decades, is now a Green member of Parliament. So I think Zach Polanski is going to continue to haunt the Labour Party. And, some pollsters, Luke Trill, said that it's estimated it's only 1 in 10 at the moment that are defecting from Labour to Reform. There are others that are saying it's 2 in 10. I mean, Luke Trill would say, however, it's only 1 in 10 because there was already a load of so-called progressive voters who had already left the Labour Party, who were planning to sit at home, who have now gone, you know what, I'm going to back this guy, Zach Polanski. And Zach Polanski has made it perfectly clear, as long as Keir Starmer's leader of the Labour Party, there will be no deals done between the Green Party and the Labour Party. And whilst it might not necessarily result in lots of Green councillors elected or Green members of Parliament in the future, what it will do is stop lots of Labour councillors and lots of Labour members of Parliament keeping their jobs. Because that split on the left, as we saw in 2024, with a split on the right, allows your opponents on the other side of the political spectrum to come through the middle.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you did to us. I mean, you might go on and build from it, and the Green Party might do, but the next round of it will probably just stop a load of Labour people from becoming MPs. So I think we've set the scene. We've got an interesting year across the main parties and the upstart parties, if you like, or on either side. And so I think There'll be plenty for us to do. We're going to try and interview some people again. We're going to do a lot of weeks like this where it's just me and you, and there's a couple of other people who have said they would like to kind of join in. We're just working all that out now, but it'd be good to kind of have a polling perspective and a Labour perspective, I think, as we go on, and maybe some others. So we'll leave it there, and we'll hopefully work. I will hopefully work out how to upload this. I can do that. I'll speak to all you lovely listeners soon.
Well, all I want to say is the many listeners that we did have, thank you. I know
Yes.
people stopped James, they've stopped me.
Mm.
Literally say, "Oh, I listened to the pod, loved it."
It's so
Particularly all
sweet.
of the university students and A-level politics students who were enjoying sort of hearing about how the theory plays
People
out in
tell you what their
reality.
favourite episode was.
And so, yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's going to be, we're on the most unprecedented time of British politics I've known in my entire lifetime. There is still a long way to go, and who knows what will happen in the next general election. But I don't think there's any one of us who right now that can say with any confidence what we think the result will be, other than what we might have as inherent bias about what we hope will happen. So, I think put your seatbelt on and get
On
ready,
that
because
bombshell.
one hell of a ride is coming our way. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Make sure you continue by following the Inside Whitehall Substack, as well as obviously making sure that you follow and subscribe, however it is you listen to your podcast, so you can stay in touch with all the latest news and obviously hear any future pods that we're able to put together. We wish you well and see you soon.
Take care.